Yo guys, welcome to RenderRam. My name is Vieku. You know that moment when you're staring at your render for hours and you think it looks good only to wake up the next day to realize it's shit? Or that moment where you are generally done with your image, but you're looking at it like something is missing and it's not just there? Well, I'm gonna show you a cool little trick how you can bypass the brain and bypass the lack of ideas. So this is a scene that I've been working on for a couple of hours and I was generally thinking it's okay. I wasn't super satisfied with it. Then I used the trick and I made it to look like this. Yes, I used AI, and yes, this is a raw render from Max. This is not AI generated image. So where did I use AI here? So initially, I made my scene, and I made this render, and I was like, man, that's a good render, only to realize that it's a shit render. But since I didn't know what to enhance here, like what can look better, etc., I loaded in my image into ComfyUI. You can use any image generator. It doesn't need to be ComfyUI. So I pretty much loaded my raw render into ComfyUI. Then I went to ChatGPT and I said, I made this render, but it doesn't look photorealistic. Can you write me a ComfyUI positive and negative prompt that I can copy and paste? I want the image to look highly photorealistic. Try adding some natural dirt and damages to the image. Just make it overall much better. So I copy and pasted the positive and negative prompt to ComfyUI here, and he generated this. And I was like, holy shit, that looks like a pretty darn good image. So from this point, I use that as a guide on where I need to head next with my image. And this is where I pretty much landed. Now, I want to show you, fine, this is a scenario where you just pretty much copy and paste things. But it's not just that, because I discovered a couple of things that I was completely ignoring in my workflows where they actually made a tremendous difference. So one of the first key differences that you can notice between these two images is the brightness, right? The color. So what I did, so in my Max, I tried raising the exposure to roughly match the image, but then I noticed that the contrasts are a little bit off. So I added curves into the whole equation, and in the curves, I was playing with the brightness channel. I added a point here, I added a point there, so I was, kind of trying to match the contrast. But then I realized that my colors are actually off, like off compared to what ComfyUI generated. But I liked what ComfyUI generated, so I wanted to match those. So at this point, I knew that my highest point is going to be here and my lowest is going to be there. So I resetted the brightness. I pretty much, practically removed all the changes. And then I went manually to the red, green, and blue. And here I tried pretty much matching those positions that I did in the brightness. I tried to manually match them there. And yes, I was pretty much trying to aim to get the raw brightness effect, but why did I do it separately on all three channels? Because I was aiming for a human error here. I was aiming that I'm gonna make a human mistake by pushing blue maybe a tiny little bit more down, red a bit more up, or something like that. And as I was playing with those values, my colors started to actually match what the ComfyUI generated. If we compare the walls here, so my wall was looking very dull and not interesting, where here it was all vibrant, and contrasty. Of course, I will not have these dark shadowy elements because it's not that kind of a wall. So I went to my material of the whole wall and I actually made it a bit more complicated, and all of this was kind of pushing the image to look more like it looked with the ComfyUI. I even added some ambient occlusion textures, all these things to just kind of pronounce the whole thing. Now, if we look those white panels in the back, as you can see, they look drastically different, and I liked what ComfyUI did, so I tried to mimic that. Now you can notice that my planks have actually a very strong and bad looking shadowing in between the planks, and you can see that here in my render, they are looking much better. So I literally took my planks and I pretty much, made them smaller, but the shadow was still there, the black one. So I actually made them, more thin and more thin until I started to get the result that you see here. But those panels still didn't look right. They still looked CGI. And, as I was trying to figure out why do they look CGI, what's the actual difference, I noticed in the AI image that pretty much each plank is different. Okay, fine, some of them are actually thinner than the other. I didn't go that deep into the whole thing, but I noticed that even these highlights here, like highlights on the left, even they have variations in colors, and it's just like the whole thing just kind of looks more organic. So in Max, I decided to actually infuse the planks with a lot of polygons. Then I added a small chamfer to them. There are actually some chamfer mistakes here, but I didn't mind. Then I smashed Open Subdiv onto that, and this actually gave me, you know, a nice smooth result. I was very happy with what I saw. But then I added Clothify. Clothify is a plugin from Mario Silagi. It's pretty much a plugin for making your objects cloth-like. It's one of those cloth making plugins. It's actually really funny because the majority of times whenever I use Clothify, I use it purely for deforming hard surface, like hard surfaces. So in general, what Clothify did, if you take a look here, I pretty much just expanded it. So there's like an expansion here. So when I added it, you can notice that there are like different kinds of bends started to happen within each plank. You see, some has some sort of mesh issues, others don't. And I was generally taking all those effects and side effects, you know, as pretty much a chunk of realism, potentially, you know, like if it works, it ain't broken kind of thing. So this is the result that I got. And then when I rendered my image, these planks actually felt very organic and very natural. Now, was it worth it to add all those details to those little planks? Well, you decide for yourself. This is the version without those effects. You can see how it looks like, and this is with those effects. I actually got all these corner pieces, you know, much more pronounced, which I think adds a lot of depth to your image, where here, these parts are completely gone. Now, as I was examining my ComfyUI image a bit more, I noticed that this part, so like this shelf here, I noticed that, you know, like you would usually put a box there. Put chamfer on it, call it a day, and that's pretty much what I did in my original scene, but this just felt different. It had some elements which I didn't have in my render. So I was trying to like zoom in and try to figure out what's happening, because I can see the colors changing here, indicating that something is physically happening with that object. So what I did, I added a box, chamfer, added a couple of polygons, and smashed Clothify Pro again. And I generally got these effects. So now if we compare these two images, for example, the image on the left is just a pure box with chamfer. The image on the right is box, chamfer, edit poly with a bit more polygons and Clothify Pro on it. You can notice that there is a, you know, weird depth happening here. Like here, you can just feel that it's kind of, you know, pointing outside and just flat down. Here you can see that something extra is happening. And I believe that details like, would I recommend you doing this for your scenes? No, I don't think so, because it's not that big of an effect. But if your resources allow it, if your time allows it, sure, go ahead and play with it. Now, apart from me trying to match all the colors to kind of, you know, fit, I noticed one part that I liked very much. If I zoom in here to the skirting board, you can see that there is some sort of like paint marks, like paint spill, you know, like paint irregularities near the skirting boards. And of course, I didn't have that in my original render, but I liked that effect a lot. So I generally found some, you know, like paint smudges, textures online, and then I used Corona decals to kind of apply these effects to the wall. And now when I zoom in here, you can actually see those paint effects. Yeah, are they spilling maybe a bit too much? Sure, but from that distance, I don't know if it really matters. But visually, these effects look very, very cool. ComfyUI also proposed that I turn on my candles in my render, so I did. But then I noticed one thing. When I turned these on, I didn't have this nice texture on my wall. You see, like, it just looks kind of real. You know, it's not just gradientally perfect kind of reflection of the flame. It just looks very nice. So I decided to play with my wall material a little bit, and I got these nice kind of, you know, reflective elements here, and I think they look cool. Of course, I also did the technique for the walls, which I covered in one of my videos with subdivision and noise modifier, which kind of gave all the walls this kind of natural, organic, slightly wavy look. If you haven't seen the video, it's actually this one. It's how to infuse your CGI walls with more realism. So in general, I was pretty much tweaking parts, trying to match the photorealism of the image to kind of infuse my render with this. And then to end the whole kind of journey, I rendered my image in double resolution. So my final output was supposed to be 2000 by 2000 pixels. I rendered it in 4000 by 4000 pixels. I imported the image to Photoshop. I used RealGrain 3 to add, you know, like grains, like film grain to an image. Pressed OK, and and here I got the cool little grain everywhere. And then I downscaled my image using bcubic sharper reduction method to get all those tiny little details to heavily pop up and just to make the whole image feel more alive. And that's pretty much it. The point of everything is, see if you can load your render into some AI enhancing generator, whatever, you know, and try to see if it can generate some cool visual ideas and try to replicate them. Just remember, there is no straight line in the real world. Everything is curvy. So if it looks crazy to you to put a bunch of polygons on a flat wall, think again, it might not be that crazy. And of course, you know, areas where you didn't pay a lot of attention, you thought that they were not important, you know, this kind of guided me, for example, to add some details there. It really boosted my overall image, you know, like that little paint dirt near the skirting board. I mean, you don't have to, you know, paint dirt the entire skirting board around the whole freaking house. Just, you know, here and there, just so that you break that line of CGI perfection. So yeah, this is the result that I came up with. I hope that you found this video interesting, and as usual, see you in the next video.